And so the Palliative Care Echo Project is supported by a financial contribution from Health Canada. And so today's session on grief and bereavement literacy is titled Bereavement in the Context of Homelessness. And so I just want to let us introduce everyone now that's going to be presenting. And so I mentioned already my name, Joshua, and I'm the Bereavement Initiative Manager at the BC Centre for Palliative Care. We also have with us Bethany Laing, and she is the Director of Operations at the Kelowna Homelessness Research Centre, KHRC. And additionally, we have with us our research assistants who were part of interviewing those with lived experience. So we have Sherry, Jody, and Jessica with us here today. And I just want to also mention that Sherry is also a lived experience advisor and a member of the Lived Experience Circle on Homelessness, LICO, and we'll be talking about their involvement in the project also. And so I'm just thrilled to basically have everyone here today to be able to share their reflections as we move forward. So today's session, as I said, we'll have an educational presentation, we'll have a discussion with the interviewers, and then we'll have a Q&A period for people in the audience to be able to ask any kind of questions before we end. And so before we begin, we'd like to do a quick poll on your current understanding of this topic before we begin. And so I'm not sure if everyone can see the poll or not, but looking at the numbers, most people somewhat knowledgeable at 63%, and then many, the 31%, not at all that knowledgeable. And so it's good to know, and hopefully that can increase following this presentation. And so looking at the learning objectives, participants will be able to better understand bereavement experience in the context of homelessness, also identify where people who are experiencing homelessness find their bereavement support, and also identify what can be done better to provide bereavement support moving forward. And so in May of 2021, the BC Centre for Palliative Care initiated a project with multiple research studies to really understand the current state of bereavement in British Columbia, which I sort of talked about a little bit. And so this research was used to guide a provincial-wide roundtable discussion that really aimed to identify these priority actions. And so one of those action items that came from that I wanted to mention was to improve grief and bereavement support for individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And so this is our project team that was developed to really help achieve understanding in this area. And we are just so fortunate to be able to develop this partnership with KHRC as we move forward, because it's a new area for me personally. And I know, like, without their support and their help, it couldn't be what it is today. And so what do we know? So first one, just provide a definition on homelessness. So homelessness has varying definitions. It may refer to individuals who are unsheltered, so be living in public spaces, on the street, be residing in emergency shelters, being provisionally accommodated, so it'd be like couch surfing or being in your car, residing in substandard housing, or even at risk of homelessness. And it is common for the bereaved who are experiencing homelessness to be unrecognized grievers in their communities and to really not have adequate support in their bereavement. And so really to better understand this, we needed to understand how bereavement is experienced in the context of homelessness. And this really led to the BC Centre's first project, which was to complete a rapid review to see what other literature had to say on the topic. And so just very quickly, we don't have a lot of time for this stuff. There's a lot to say, but we're just gonna go very quickly over this stuff. And so there were 4 themes that were generated from looking at the literature. And so bereavement was a risk factor for homelessness. Another theme was the anticipatory grief that was discussed, and especially for those who had pets who are also experiencing homelessness. And people in the different studies also stated that there was a high frequency of deaths of people that they cared about during their experiences of homelessness. And lastly, the ways of processing grief. So it can be very difficult for the bereaved individuals to process their grief while concurrently experiencing homelessness. And so as homelessness itself invokes grief and trauma responses, And that said, some of the articles discussed some diverse coping mechanism, and some of them were talking with shelter staff, being around their pets, also memorials, and more avoidant and escapist means of coping, such as the use of drugs or alcohol. And you can find this, the study that was published. You can sort of see the citation below. And I will sort of say too, we will be sending out a summary of this study and the next study we're going to be talking about, in case you're interested in knowing more about what we found. So overall, the synthesis of the findings really reflect unclear evaluations of bereavement in the context of homelessness. Really, most of the articles reported were designed to investigate other topics outside of this area. And so despite these limitations, our analysis of these articles identified the importance of providing better bereavement support. And so future research really needs to explore how best to support bereaved individuals experiencing homelessness with their grief. And so the next study that we were able to complete was to explore the topic from the perspectives of frontline workers who provide health or social support for individuals experiencing homelessness in British Columbia. And we had 72 participants complete a survey. And just once again, very quickly, some of the findings were that 79% of participants agreed that grief has become normalized and expected within the landscape of the work they do, with 11% being not sure. Almost all participants had a desire to increase their knowledge of grief and grief-informed approaches to care. And most participants, 89%, experience their own grief when a client dies. And over half those individuals said their organization can do more to support them, with 15% preferring not to say. And so from their qualitative responses, some of the themes generated for how we can increase grief support for people experiencing homelessness were the need for flexible service delivery, so increased mobility, outreach, groups designed for people with multiple complex needs, such as mental health disorders and substance use. Another one was increased grief and bereavement training for those who support clients. So just knowledge on how to support a client grieving and also the resources available. Third one was increase interdisciplinary collaboration. So just really partnerships with housing services and shelters with other grief organizations. And then lastly, to really meet the basic needs and establish safety. So this would be like food, water, clothing, and a safe place to live and be supported in. And so overall, this study really paints a picture of broad unmet needs and low grief and bereavement literacies for both clients and staff. But there is that strong desire by participants to really increase their knowledge on grief and bereavement literacy, which is very promising. But the questions still remain on the lived experience and what is needed and helpful within for that. And so, as I said, we'll provide a summary of these two articles. But this leads us to our next sort of study on individuals with lived or living experiences, with the aim to really better understand their grief experiences and thoughts on how to provide better bereavement support. And so this project has been funded in part by the BC Centre for Palliative Care, also Health Canada, and also partners, the KHRC, which received funding from the University of British Columbia Okanagan Eminence Program. And this is my spot where I get to pass it over to Stephanie. So Stephanie, if you want to take over.
Thank you so much, Joshua. So as Joshua mentioned, our study into the lived experience of individuals and their grief and bereavement had participant eligibility requirements of folks having experienced the death of someone that they care about. So whether that was human or animal, and in the last year that they had experienced grief for that loss while also experiencing homelessness, whether that was unsheltered or not. During this time, we completed 80 in-person interviews and 2 closing events, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later. 40 of the interviews and a closing ceremony was held on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation in what is colonially known as Kelowna, BC. And a further 40 interviews and closing ceremony were held on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in what is colonially known as Downtown Eastside in Vancouver, BC. And during our time with participants, they received $30 cash honorarium in gratitude for sharing their knowledge and experiences with us, as well as food and drinks and some coping supplies that we had put together, which consisted of notebooks and coloring pages, some chocolate, and also some stress balls or stress bananas, rather. If we could go to the next slide, you'll see that for talking about our measures and analysis, we completed semi-structured interviews with each of our 80 participants, comprising of 25 questions. And each interview had 2 interviewers. So there was a peer researcher mentioned earlier, that's Sherry, and a grief therapist. So if that was in Kelowna, that would have been Jess. And if it was in Vancouver, then that was Jody. Questions included demographic information, experiences of homelessness, their experiences entering homelessness for the first time, grief experiences, and grief supports, as well as their thoughts around what could be done differently or what was needed, where there were gaps, in order to best recommend future grief supports. And thematic analysis was used for all of these interviews. And so what did we find for our results? Echoing what was discovered in the rapid review was that bereavement was a risk factor for homelessness. Many participants explicitly connected their bereavement to the time that they felt their lives fell apart, or that it was the turning point for transitioning into homelessness, whether that was from the loss of a partner or family breakdown. For the next slide, we can talk about the grief experience and what those challenges may be. So in general, participants really spoke about the impact of grief and how that was experienced in a wide range of responses, emotional, cognitive, physical, and so forth. But many also discussed dreams of the deceased that they had had. While some individuals were comforted by these dreams, others were distressed by them. There were also secondary losses as a result of their grief experience that they discussed, such as a loss of job, loss of housing, and loss of community. Many participants stated that they had a high frequency of deaths of those they cared about while experiencing homelessness. And they also spoke about getting where they received support. So this was from friends, this could have been from pets, staff and volunteers of different organizations that they were accessing. But specific grief service provider supports were used less often. And so we wondered why that was. If we can go to the next slide, we can talk about some of those challenges and barriers. Oh, no, don't go to the next slide. Sorry, Esther. Participants identified what those challenges and barriers to accessing specific grief service provider supports. Some of our participants had identified limited knowledge of what support is even available. So there's very much an information gap. Also, that there were limited services and resources that were available to provide that support. So whether that was unattainable conditions being placed on accessing support, for example, folks having to remain sober and have been sober for a certain period of time before receiving services, the inaccessibility of services. So this included things like needing phone and internet access in order to receive support and not having phone or internet access. Certainly long wait lists, nowhere to store their belongings in order to go into locations to receive services. Financial constraints was a big component in order to access services. Often you're needing some finances to support that. And transportation was certainly mentioned as well, a lack of transportation to be able to access supports located in different areas of cities. Stigma and mistrust, lastly, was a big piece. So there was stigma associated with experiences of homelessness, but also for the type of death that participants may have been trying to access support for. Certainly fear or discomfort of accessing that formal support as a result of that stigma and mistrust was explained that services were also not culturally accessible or appropriate. And so in order to address some of these challenges and barriers, we asked participants what they would like to see for future grief support. What suggestions do they have? And they certainly came with a lot of suggestions for us. First and foremost was more one-on-one and group supports available with individuals that they trust, that's accessible and a safe place, and provides a safe space for gathering. More outreach workers providing grief support, and more people who come to you and to the places where you can go. Animal therapy inside and outside, potentially through outreach support, was mentioned as a possible suggestion. Peer support was often brought up. Individuals that participate in the study frequently identified that their lived experience and individuals from the same cultural background would ease some of their concerns around stigma and mistrust, but also would allow for better healing. Increasing staff and volunteer grief and bereavement training was mentioned by many participants. Memorials and celebrations, the frequency with which they occur and being able to access them was brought up as future suggestions. Creative outlets for grief, such as art-based support, dance, really just something physical to work through an individual's grief. Even access to a gym for working out was mentioned by many participants. As I mentioned earlier, around having culturally appropriate and culturally specific supports, some of the specific suggestions were around overall greater culturally appropriate supports being available and accessible, increases in the opportunity to engage in smudging, land-based teachings, having more Indigenous counselors that are trained in grief and bereavement training and support. Building community through activities. So simple things such as gardening, picnics, and walks are things that are not usually accessible with others that are going through the same experience in this way. And so really actively trying to build community and opportunities to build community for people that are experiencing grief was mentioned many times. More opportunities for addressing substance use alongside grief. Certainly information about where to get support, whether that's through printed materials that are placed in many different locations. A lot of information is available online, which not everyone has access to, and it can certainly make that, as we mentioned earlier, a challenge to accessing support. And so being mindful about where information is placed and how it is communicated to others. More supports overall for training and timing. So having support available outside of the 9 to 5 and the Monday to Friday was really quite a large portion of their participants had suggested this moving forward. In dealing with some of the challenges around transportation or anything to do with kind of internet or phone access, providing assistance with that transportation or the internet. So having that available, having online support available, folks would be open to receiving supports. For our suggestions, our final suggestion for future grief supports was really meeting folks' basic needs for food and housing. As Joshua mentioned earlier and was emphasized by all participants, it is so hard to address grief when basic needs are not met. Water. If we can move over to the next slide, we can start to talk about what's next, and I'll hand it back to Joshua for that.
Okay, so before we go what's next, I just want to also just give a thanks to everyone part of these studies in the research that really trusted us enough to share their stories with us and their thoughts. And so I just want to give a thank you to all those people that we are mentioning what they sort of said, and also thank all the people who supported the project and the collection and helped us share the details of the study within the community. It was a huge task that we were able to do this, but there's a lot of hands that really helped with that. And so when we look at what's next, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that we can create a safe space for the bereaved who are experiencing homelessness to really grieve. But this research is a significant step in the right direction. And we are excited to announce that because of this project, we ended the developed partnerships in the Downtown East Side and the Death Care Project, the BC Centre for Palliative Care, and the Carnegie Community Centre, with additional partnerships from KHRC, Carnegie Branch Library of the Vancouver Public Library, and Death Care BC, secured $25,000 funding from the CUES Fund at UBC. And the funding will allow the Carnegie Community Center to conduct grief and bereavement support programming and end-of-life information and planning in 2024 and also in 2025. So I'm just really super excited about that, and it just opens my heart that because of the research that we're doing, the supports can now sort of be available to sort of see what works and what doesn't. And additionally to that, we also received a grant from the Michael Smith Health Research BC to develop a free online education module and resources to improve grief and bereavement knowledge for those who support people experiencing homelessness, as well as host a symposium on the topic. And so we're currently with a committee, and we're developing that information, and hopefully by next year, beginning of next year, we'll have some of that available for people to be able to take. And so additionally, on top of all that, you know, like, we still got more. And so I think Stephanie's good to be able to explain this, but she is in talks with Kelowna to do a yearly memorial service for those who are unhoused and those who serve them, and something similar to the closing events that we kind of did with the research project that was completed. And so we will talk about those closing events next. I think they're super important, and one of the most beautiful things that I saw in my whole research career, and the way that this all played out.
I would agree. I think something that we feel that was really special in our research was the opportunity to hold a closing event for the community. So the ceremony was intended as an expression of gratitude for everyone that was involved in the study, as well as a way to honor those who have died in the community and those who have been impacted by those losses. So we had hoped that the ceremonies would provide an opportunity to feel seen and supported, and believe that it did. Our first one was held in Kelowna on July 26, 2023. I can't believe it was already over a year ago. And was organized with members of the research team, the Lived Experience Circle on Homelessness, LICO. And we gathered together at City Park. As you can see in this picture here, it was a beautiful day with guests Edna Terbasket of Kelowna Friendship Society and Elder Grouse Barnes. During the ceremony, we were guided through an opening prayer, through a eulogy to honor all of those who have died, a drumming circle, and smudging. We completed the event with food, and we created a memorial art piece together. As you can see in the bottom picture and on the next slide, a white shopping cart that was adorned with the names of those that we have lost in our community, and it's now respectfully located at Outdoor Sheltering Site OS4 in Kelowna. Before we actually located the cart, we used it to take leftover food and drinks to people in the downtown and in OS4. On our next slide, you can see that the memorial art piece is still present at the site today, and it's being honored by those in the community. We've left markers and tags on it, which have been used, and try to drop by infrequently to add more as needed to encourage the memorial art piece to grow. We've also learned from Sherry and others that when someone has died since the memorial art piece has been placed or is grieving, folks will actually move it to the location of the griever to offer additional support, which just melts my heart thinking about it.
I think this is a good time to bring in Sherry to really talk about, and Jess and Jody, to really talk about their experiences, you know, with the closing event and their thoughts on that. So if Sherry is here, I believe she is.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you see me?
Sherry, hi.
Yeah, but it's very interesting how you see the NFA there. And if everybody knows it's no fixed address. So when I saw somebody put on the chats that it was haunting. And you know what? It's not. I think the only thing that's haunting is not them not being able to say goodbye to these people. And I think it was very important because you could see the one there with that was an actual site next to the cart is my little, we used to call him Hobbit. And he is my little street brother. And that's where he OD'd. And there's many more that come. And what gets me is that after it's very interesting being with lived experience. And as my previous roles, I was a human service worker, and I did lots of work, frontline work from the first opening of the Cornerstone, where personally, I had to leave after doing over 100 ODs because a lot of them were, they all came back. So it's kind of like, to me, it wasn't haunting when I wrote their names down. And a lot of people said it was a release. And every day I see people downtown. And what gets me the most, when after we were done handing we handed out tobacco ties. And that's very prominent in my culture and most Indigenous cultures, just to show respect for those that have passed. And pizza. And one of the fellas, he was a little brother of mine too, a native street brother. And we were in the alley and we gave them pizza. They were so happy. And we gave them tobacco ties, right? And Kirkland, the little brother, he was so, and who was to say 2 weeks ago, he passed 2 weeks after he overdosed in that alley. So it was quite, and you know what? His sister had told me, she goes, he always carried that tobacco tie wherever he went. And that to me, at least our prayers were with him, or whoever is like part of it. It is a protection too. And a lot of things too, when I looked at this, my big problem with, especially when it comes to research and other things, is I hate that word ism. You have the symbolism. Well, you know what? There's a lot of, some people call it symbolism. In my culture, we call it symbolic. And this bringing the symbolic back to grieving, the symbolicness of look at the sights, look at the little things, and look how, what really like, and this is my own, because I'm still keeping my tobacco secret, even though I smudge my lungs every now and then. But it's a lot of times you have to go out of your comfort zone. To the hardest part for me, I think, was getting open. We had 40 minutes, sometimes it took 20 minutes, sometimes it took 2 hours. And what really amazed me was the trust that these people had in us. They came in and they told us stories, and having just the staff that we had, the team we had, like me with my lived experience, and plus I've done academics too, but it's just having that quality put back into it. But keeping within to the quantitative part, because it's the hardest part for me. But like I said, it's always trying to get that the medicine wheel. I like everything I do, my work, every day, my personal life, I try to go with the medicine wheel, and the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And that's what really got me about this research, was that we nailed all of it. And a lot of it had to do with things that people don't want to ask about. Like one of the big things for me, especially in my culture, is that dreams. Dreams, that's where a lot of people get their medicine from. Dreams is a lot of where people get the prophecies from. And I think that hit a lot of people too when we're giving, because nobody talks about their dreams, especially when you ask somebody who's homeless. We've had people that opened up to us that said, like, I mean, but they're so comfortable. I mean, a lot of things could have been incriminating, but they trusted us with it, like, you know. And what I told them, as soon as I told them, and the first thing they'd say, like, you know, because obviously I'm Indigenous, and first thing they'd say is like, why are you doing this? Like, you know, I said, because I'm tired of having documents and doing research where it's just sitting there and not, and I said, to me, it's living. And and I think that's where it hit a lot of the people that we interviewed the hardest. It's like, your words aren't going to go out and said, unheard. So whatever it is, and there's no such thing as no dumb question or no dumb answer. So, and it's amazing how much people have out there that they are so in tune with themselves. It's just that everybody else isn't. Like the services and whatnot. It's like, because everybody's at their own level. And I think what really got me was how word of mouth. I mean, it hit me really hard, especially on downtown East Side. Within a week, I went there. I didn't hardly know anybody. I didn't know anybody on the street. Within 2 days, I was called sister by the local natives, and they were there to meet me every day and to meet me every night and tease the shit out of me. But that's how it is. Getting that and having that the trust. And I think what is great is having our team together, because like I do have the proper, but having the balance of it all, because and what I noticed more, and I can't even say culturally correct, because you know what, the street culture is totally different. They don't have there's no color barrier when it comes to homelessness. And I think that's, the more I look into it, a lot of this can be, a lot of us, what we Indigenous people go through is the same thing that these street people go through. just worse at times. And I think we have to, I think a lot of times I really love the way how we got to integrate my indigenous beliefs, and those most of the beliefs that we practice here are universal, which is good. Then, and that's because everybody knows that we're all urban Indians and we're all displaced out here, and addressing those urban indigenous people, which I say were like 90% of the people that we interviewed that were indigenous. And with that, I think what really hit me was how we opened a can of worms and closed it so quick, and leaving everybody feeling so safe. And that 5 minutes it took for me to go outside to have a cigarette with them, to walk them down the stairs, was unbelievable and life-changing for me and life-changing for them. The reason why I can say that was because I had this fellow show up at downtown East Side and gave me a pack of smokes. And he's homeless, doesn't have no address. I don't even think his Gmail worked, but he showed up and he gave me a pack of smokes, and he was about 62 years old. And he was like, I told you I was going to be here. And that brought me the same thing as research here in Kelowna with my lived experience and knowing the people that I do know. And me forgetting, oh, I can't believe it, you're here. And that being like, I told you I'd be here. You should know better. It's going to be here. And the whole word of mouth, and I was trusting this word of mouth. And for you to, and what really honored me was said they're going to be here and they already showed up. Because everybody knows you make appointments and don't show up. Yeah, but that was an honor for me. And I think a lot of us was gaining that trust. That trust wasn't gained very easily. Like I said, it took me a lifetime to gain it. And I think with people in this and having the open mind of like meeting people where they're at, I think was the biggest thing that we came across. And that's where, well, regardless who we are, and recognizing the street culture, they have their own community, and how much they safeguard their feelings and trying to break through that safeguard. I think is going to be the challenge right now, and having the people that'll listen. But it's so good to hear that all the grads just makes me smile. I mean, it's not everything's. I didn't have to go against my word, but yes, it was quite the experience. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sherry, for speaking, just being a part of the project. In general, it's really, I think, opened our eyes too on how to just, make it better and make it with more heart. And I said, like, you put a lot into it based on your own personal experiences and your knowledge of what people wanted, and to be able to open up the can of worms and close it very gently, so we didn't ask too much of them as in the project. And I want to actually ask you, because people may not know, so why did Lico and yourself want a white cart? Because this wasn't an idea from us. This was something you brought forward that was able to be manifested. And so could you speak about that?
Yes, I joined the lived experience circle on homelessness with the here in Kelowna since I believe 2019. And this was brought up because you see the white bikes here in Kelowna, they had white bikes around. And that was to memorial for people that have passed away that got hit by bikes or something. And then, so we saw that. And then all of a sudden, we just sat there one day. It's like, why don't we have a white cart? And it's because, and one of the reasons why is because it hits my heart. And it's like one of the people that we spoke to a lot. He always carried a cart. And we saw his cart. I saw his cart downtown, and I asked another legal member, and they said, yeah, what happened to him? Then when I spoke to a homeless person later that day, that cart was left there because the guy had overdosed and nobody wanted to touch it. Right. So, and I think that became symbolic for us, and everybody knows. And now the white cart is it symbolizes a lot of things, especially when you're limited. You can't go into buildings, you can't go in places if you carry a cart. You can't, if you have this cart, you are limited in what you do and who you interact with. Saying like, the whatever it comes to the judgments of people on the streets. But this white cart is your home. So that's basically the mobile home on wheels, and representing their home, because that's everything in your life. And it just brought me flashback from the other day when I was speaking to the 77-year-old homeless man with 2 dogs. And he refuses to live in any place. But you know what? I have my cart. So hearing that, it just still brings. And I asked him, do you ever go there? He goes, I saw that white cart. And he goes, I threw some names in there. He goes, really? He goes, no, I was going through Tent City. I don't want to live in Tent City because it's a lot of stuff happens there. But he said he threw a couple names in there. He just put on a piece of paper and threw it in. But he says, you know what? He says that catches everybody's eye. And I said, it's meant to catch people's eye and maybe hit them in the heart. And people all suffer the same. Doesn't matter. There's somebody who's loved, there's somebody's person. But the white cart is definitely something that we always wanted to do with LECO since I've started. And wow, 2019, that's a long time ago. And to have it manifest and actually come into play was so much. I mean, yeah, it was so good to have that and to have that actually come to life. Like even on the work that we were doing with this research coming to life is all bringing life back to those that are grieving, I think is what this symbolizes to me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sherry.
Yeah.
I'm going to now bring up Jess if she's here.
Hi, yes, I am.
Oh, hi, Jess.
Hello.
And so I just want to have your reflections on just, being a part of this closing event, like what your thoughts on it was, and if it moved you at all, like did anything change within you being able to be a part of that?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to give a shout out to Sherry. I could not have done my job with this project if it wasn't for Sherry. Sherry just took so much of it on herself to really go above and beyond for everyone we interviewed. And that meant the world just to witness for me and for everyone that she interacted with, just amazing. It wouldn't have been impactful as it was without you, Sherry. So I just wanted to say that first. But yeah, it definitely changed me. I now volunteer with folks providing accessible counseling to folks who've experienced homelessness. So I definitely left being I have to do more to just do what I can. It was such an honor being a part of this whole project, and it was so powerful. It's hard to put into words what it was like to be at that closing event. I got to also add, people I lost to that cart. It was for everyone. It was accessible and it meant a lot. So yeah, I don't know what else more to say about the closing event, but I'm glad everyone came who did come. And I think if it was a more regular thing, the word would spread more and it would be, more people would attend and be a part of it. And it would be a powerful thing that people look forward to actually grieve. And it would be that safe place for them. It's interesting because we did it in a public park. And I don't know if that would be different if it was in a more private setting, maybe a level of safety with that. But yeah, I think it was amazing.
It's going to be interesting to see as we move forward, how it all transforms to sort of to be the safest place possible, but also to be able to be what people want. And maybe you said it's one of those things, maybe they want that sort of to show everyone, what they're avoiding, or maybe it's something that they want to sort of keep more close into where their community lies.
And I think everyone had different answers to that, right? People want different things. So we're going to meet people where we're at in this area, and there's no one right answer, I think, right? There's lots of ways you can approach it.
That's so true. And so I look forward to seeing what that all turns into, but I'm just so appreciative of just these events for myself too, just opening my own heart and learning a lot, and just being in the presence of this, I would say, love. It's just community of just love. And it's different, and so I remember when I was sitting there and Shannon Sherry was speaking, and then we had the drumming, and just something in me just opened, and I just I was crying, and it was just such a momentous moment for me in my lifetime that I'll never forget. And even being able to hang out with the team and be able to sort of interact with people who are experiencing homelessness it was a memory that I wish all my research experiences had. And so this really kind of put a mark in my heart and said the path I'm walking moving forward. And then one of those people who I met along the way was Jody, if she's here. She was at the event. She didn't interview at this time, but she has been influential in, I think, raising my awareness of the need for more understanding in this area. So Jody, if you're here.
Hello, yes.
You were at this event, and can you sort of speak about your impressions on being here?
Mhm. Mhm. I find everything in relation to this research really easily all comes at me at once, still, years later. What comes up in this moment, though, I think actually is the word symbolic and haunting. Both of those are sort of resonating with me. I think absolutely, I'm a changed person from being touched by and the stories that I feel so honored to hold. And what's really interesting about it is what I learned so many things, but big learning was a confrontation of ego experience. And I think there being a power beyond the self. And I think that comes very often in grief. I think holding the tensions of something that's so haunting and yet has this beauty to it, like the art that we're looking at right here that has something symbolic to it. So it makes me think of a poem I really like. So a few words from a poet, Rilke, is "Let it all happen to you, the beauty and horror. Take my hand." And I think of that often when I'm sitting with grief. It is just holding the beauty and the horror, the love and the pain. And what I have found amazing in participating in this project in particular is the validation of my own grief, absolutely, with my experience as a frontline staff. And so I also have names there on the cart. And it was that was the first time I was able to feel as though I was really recognizing mostly youth, actually, I was working with at the time who had died while experiencing homelessness and challenges with substance use. And now it's amazing to me. I kind of entered the rooms when I was interviewing wondering, I don't know what's going to show up, and am I going to have capacity to hold what shows up? And the way that my heart is growing, somehow it's growing, and I'm able to hold so many more people and stories, and that has been extremely powerful as well.
That's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. And we're going to just move forward to the other closing event. Stephanie, did you want to talk about this?
Yes, thank you. So in addition to the really powerful event that we had in Kelowna, it became clear to us that this is something we needed to do for both of our sites. And in 2022, Carnegie Community Centre with the Carnegie Branch Library of the Vancouver Public Library created and organized the Community Death Care Project. So throughout 2023, they offered 4 quarterly community memorial services. And our project was actually invited to use that 4th memorial service to celebrate the conclusion of our research project and to host a closing event in downtown Eastside as well on December 6, 2023. So at this event, we gathered together at the Carnegie Theatre in the Carnegie Community Centre with guest Elder Marr. And during the event, we were guided through an opening prayer, through a sharing circle that included our research team, which was so incredible. And at this event, we also had food, including fresh fruit and drinks available. And many people spoke about the impact that grief had had on them and the hope that they had for future events like this to occur, which we're so pleased are going to as a result of the CUES grant that Joshua spoke about earlier. And so I'm curious if there are reflections from Jody or Sherry or Joshua on our closing event at Carnegie Centre.
I would love to share a little bit. I do want to speak again to sort of how invaluable Sherry is as an individual and of course as a team member. I have been inspired a number of times by Sherry. I think at this ceremony, Sherry played a role in sort of nurturing and creating this environment that was so attuned to people's needs. At times, Sherry would offer people a beverage or something to eat, or another time was picking up people's cups or just created was just sort of actually, yeah, just this nurturing role that really, I think, created the experience, as well as the courage in singing. I'm astounded, and it's a memory I will carry with me to my grave. Is the ability to sing, and to sing from that place of pain and grief was so powerful. And lastly, I invited my partner to this experience, which I think it was a bit of breaking down a number of boundaries, in that I myself sat in the seat of a participant. And that was so validating, to be able to sit with the people who I had sat with interviewing, and share my own grief and sort of my own process in moving forward, carrying the stories that I carry. But what was amazing was my partner's experience of the ceremony, and that he woke the next morning and said he felt like he was still, he had individual stories that touched him in a certain way. And he said, I still feel like I'm waking up with these people. And it's amazing, 24 hours later, I'm still feeling a difference. Thanks.
Wow.
I'll pass it on.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And yeah, same with me. This ceremony was much different than the first one. And so I wasn't actually sure what it was going to be. And so for me, I was more serving of the fruits. I wasn't a part of the circle as much as some of the other team members were. But to just witness it and see so many people sharing and feeling comfortable sharing was an eye-opener. I didn't know if that was going to happen or not. But as you said, Sherry and the people who were sharing, having that kind of courage to really set the stage was so important. And the people who were coming to the tables to get the fresh fruit, which was like a big hit, there was just, so you could tell, like, there was a lightness to them, and they're really excited to be there. And I remember people sharing how important this was and how much they wanted this to happen more often, which really warmed my heart to sort of say, like, something we did like mattered. A lot of times when you do research, you don't know the impact it has. It sometimes just sits in a drawer, sits on the internet, and like no one really reads it. But this had like this meaning right away that I could see with my eyes and my heart that this mattered. And for me, that's the stuff that I take with me as I move forward in this life. And I can only hope more research that I'm a part of can do something like this, and I can witness this, because it was a very beautiful experience to be a part of this and honor the people's grief and witness it the way I was able to. And I'm going to end there. Sherry, is there anything did you want to say about this
Yeah.
closing event?
It's like really crazy how, like I said, I felt like the downtown east side hit me different, because for one thing, I didn't really know anybody there, but I guess my happy personality got them in or something, or maybe there's a cigarette, but anyways, they came. What really amazed me about it all was that I think to me, what hit me the most and what made me come into this this wholeheartedly was one of this older fella. He was 76 years old, and he lost his son. And I think to me that's more of a personal, maybe a personal healing, maybe a personal insight that I didn't know I lost, or maybe I forgot. I guess some may call it. But when I was sitting there and I told him, like, well, this place where he frequented with his son. I go, oh, and I named the place. I've never been there. He dropped back on his chair. He looked at me. He goes, how do you know that? I didn't tell you that. And that hit me because he didn't. And I was like, how did I know that? And to me, and it was weird because I almost felt like it was more, this work was more than it's not just for us, as those are in the spirit world that are watching over us too. And having a sharing circle at the end, and having people but like this, I don't know if you guys remember a couple of the young Native fellows there that were in the back. They were the quietest guys there. Like, if you're the only time they did talk was when you're on one-on-one. And I think Jody probably recalls the one. He was always outside on the third floor with us, and he'd be out there almost every day. But the day we left, he gave me a hug, and it was just amazing how much that closing ceremony had hit him. And he said he doesn't speak to anybody, he doesn't trust anybody, whether it's drug and I think more like mental or whatever, substance abuse induced, but it's still, he was there and he spoke out. and I couldn't get, because he said he doesn't trust anybody, doesn't talk to anybody. And to have somebody like that, for us to break through their shell like that, it hit me to a whole new level. Like, this is not just something that's going to sit there. This is that hits everybody in all their faces, mentally, emotional, spiritual, and physically. Because after this, I lost my dad, and I think one of the memorial that I had put by the BC Central Palliative Care's newsletter, it just came together so much. I wish I could remember it off by heart. But then what I ended it with, like, this research was so important to myself, and how I deal with things, because a lot of people, as we know, Indigenous people don't trust the system. And I will, like hell, will not go in front of a therapist and be told how messed up I am. I'd go to an elder and talk to them first, or my mom, or somebody who knows, who's been there. And that's lived, I guess, the lived experience, some people call it, but that's our traditional way. And I go talk to my elders, because how we heal is totally different how the Western society heals. And I think a lot of this, the work that we've done has opened that too. So I think it's like looking from everything from every perspective. And like I tell everybody, if you really want to help the Indigenous people in this world of systems, first, you got to break apart the system and start from the beginning, from the roots. And yeah, but nobody was willing to do that, because everybody knows you have to piggyback on some societies, but still. And having that perspective in there and having these people speak out hit me hard, because I didn't think he'd talk, and he talked for like a minute or so. And all the ones that were voiceless, like, from you talk to them on the street, we're talking that's what hit me hard, was wow. And to have that, like Jody said, like, having to share my customs in there, because if I'm still able to walk and talk and to serve coffee and tea and clean up after for an elder, I will. That's just my way. That's just the way I thought. So it's kind of ingrained in me. But thanks for noticing that. And those are little gestures that you can do to help others, right? And whether it's earning that trust, but I think, now I think of it, my grandmother and my grandparents taught me, right? And that's how you do it. It's just common respect, because everybody knows that they have nothing else to offer but their hearts. And believe me, it's priceless at times like this. And having that, the downtown east side was just so amazing it was a total different setup, because he ingrained the sacred circle into that. And to me, that was a whole new level of, if they had TRC, call to action, that should be one for the books. But yes, it was so great. And I'll never, it's once in a lifetime experience. And I'm so glad I was there to experience it. Must see.
And it's beautiful, Sherry, just like as you're saying, how the behavior of individuals and participants, and how open they were to share with you, but also the comfort, and almost you could tell almost the gratitude for the space you and the interviewers were providing, I thought was like really remarkable, because it's so quickly you guys built that trust and you provided that safety for them. And I know you sort of shared a little bit on it, and I want to bring in Jess first, if she could talk about a little bit of her reflections on about doing the interviews and what she saw in the sense of individuals and how they responded to being asked about their grief.
Yeah, I was quite maybe pleasantly surprised is the right way to put it, of how open they were. And Sherry's touched on that a little bit, of how the trust was there and the safety was there. And we were quite in like a small room as well. So maybe that was part of it. We were very close to each other physically. So then it was maybe a little more easy for them to be like, okay, like we could literally touch each other if we reached across the room. But I don't know, something that like has stuck with me really is that they need to have those basic needs met to feel a long-term sense of safety to actually grieve fully. And that's just not there when they're experiencing homelessness. So that stuck out to me. If we don't like work on that piece of things, then whatever, that's just a really key piece of the grief work that needs to be done. But yeah, it was a lot of trust. They were very open with things in ways that, the clients I typically see are not. And they knew what they needed. That's another thing I loved. There was just so many creative ideas that they had of how to actually work on things and how to make things different and how to meet their needs, because they knew them. And sometimes I ask clients, my typical clients, what a lot of them don't know what they need. but they knew they were so, like as Sherry said, so in tune with themselves and knew what was missing. And so there's just so much wisdom in that they have within them. But yeah, like the comments were saying, like they're just not seen. And this was a chance for us to really get to know them and see them, even if it was 20 minutes, like Sherry was saying, or 2 hours, but the time varied, and they were allowed to also make that decision for themselves of how long they wanted to spend with us. I thought that was really important, that they had full autonomy over what they shared, how long they shared. And they were also thankful for what they received in the end too. And they were thankful to us for just spending that time with them and asking those questions. And yeah, it really stuck with me. The first few days were especially challenging for me, having less lived experience and less exposure. But it became, yeah, now I work downtown in Kelowna, and so I see the people that we interviewed quite regularly, and I remember some of their names, and a lot of their stories have stuck with me. So yeah, it's yeah, don't know what else to say.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's very interesting on being able to just be in front of people and see what they're willing to share. I think there's this myth that you don't want to open it up, you don't want to like talk about it, so many people avoid it. But I think we're, this study and as we're moving forward is just, if you provide a safe space, if you're willing to listen and you're gentle, it's amazing what people are willing to share when they have that safe space, for them. And so I want to bring up Jody, because she was in the downtown east side, and to share her reflections on doing the interviews and hearing people's stories on how they approached it.
Our room in the Carnegie Center was definitely larger. And that's interesting that you had mentioned the small room might bring a sense of safety. I think of that maybe in an opposite sense. It was fun, the larger room. Sometimes we had one younger gentleman who was just over 20 who wanted us to sit in a circle and rearrange the room. A lot of other people kind of we offered if maybe we wanted to change things around, but often people would kind of sit as it was. So what I did notice is that, well, I'd like to kind of piggyback off of your idea, talking about sort of meeting people's basic needs. I think that this is huge, and that this starts actually with people who are not experiencing homelessness, but that sort of need to place themselves in those shoes. The value of dignity, I think, is performative. When people are working with people who have lived experience of homelessness, people do not have access to a shower, to a bathroom. The environment that people are living in is not one where a nervous system can calm. So that makes it not a place where healing can occur. Often when we would meet people, sometimes there'd be sort of one presentation outside of the interview room and then another presentation once the interview did occur. Often I would find people were quite open, and there were individuals who showed up prepared. They had their meeting reminder and they had notes on what they wanted to be sure they sort of touched all their points. So that was a lot of fun to sit with too. So you really do see everything. That being said, there were individuals who definitely were in one state outside, and when they would come in, I would find their nervous systems were calming, but to the extreme, where now they're maybe sleepy or drowsy or no longer present. And there was one individual where I think definitely sort of went into was very open and loud, and this was the day that you weren't there, Sherry. And then when we sat down, I think there was not a sense of trust, and to me what seemed to be sort of a traumatic response of closure. So that was interesting as well. So I do think sort of my idea of homelessness now, my definition of what a home is, has definitely broadened to the idea that home is a place where your attempts to escape can cease, where your nervous system can calm and settle, and that when we think about housing individuals, that should be the starting place. I do think also what sort of presented itself to me throughout the interviews was also that the need to to feel the suffering viscerally, to have it be felt and to meet your pain, and the ability to be able to hold this pain without letting it ripple into everything that you do. A relationship to the self, and how fractured that becomes, I think, with grief. And then I think when you're not in a relationship to yourself, you're automatically not in relation to a power beyond the self. And sitting in those rooms, that's sort of where I sat. Every morning I would wake up and I had a little bit of a ritual I did before sitting in the room. I also carried Sherry's handmade tobacco tie, which I felt sort of was hopefully bringing something to the space. But really I was sitting there just with that understanding that there's always something unknown to be added. And that the best I can really do is probably invite the grief into the room and sit with it. I'm not necessarily going to know what to do with it, and that is not my journey to take. But it became very clear that the ego, that our humanness cannot withstand all the suffering in the world. The stories that were shared are really validated and brought voice to immense tragedy, torment, misery, and suffering in the world. As well as people did. They came up with these creative ideas that were full of life and mercy for themselves, self-compassion beyond the self. And there's also this, I think, in the downtown east side, and often individuals with lived experience, I find you get sort of overcompensated expressions of things, aggression, also radiance and essence and joy. One woman spoke about how it is her dream to just dance down downtown east side and share joy with others. And I think that is a wonderful idea and something that is needed in these areas too. Thank you.
Amazing. And I'll just leave, I guess, one last thing. So for Sherry, did you want to add anything to this before we open up questions to the audience?
You know, what really resonates to me was, you know what, I just thought of it now, and how, like, just the work here in Kelowna, and Jody and I mean, the things that, like, you know, it's some of the things that people shared. It's just, it still hits me. And there's a lot of things that, there's a lot of personal growing for us. And like this whole area is all great. They've never done research in this area. And no matter how professional you are, you still have a heart going to hit you somehow, right? And it's so important how we every morning, and I even here in Kelowna, we did that. Like, you know, how do you feel today? Because everybody has a bad day too, right? Because that can affect the way you interview people too. And right, and how we did at the end, we kind of shared what we learned today, and a lot of it was themes that were just really crazy how things worked out in Vancouver. But you know what really got me about everything was this fella told me, and this was actually, there's one here in Kelowna, and the old fella in downtown east side, one that gave me the tobacco, I'll never forget that. He goes, you know what, I may not have a place to go, but now he goes, I never knew you could pray anywhere. Look at me, I'm this old. And he says, oh yes. I told him, thank you is a prayer, like, you know, itself. I says, you don't have to whatever, but just like, if you ever feel down about a person, just thank you for the experience from that person. And what he said, and it hit me hard. He says, you know what, everywhere I don't go, you can't control my mind. My mind, I have a safe place to share that. And he goes, when I see people that are close to me, because everybody knows they have to put up that shield to survive when you're on the street, right? And we saw that so prevalent in a lot of the outcomes of because a lot of people were afraid to share because, or they didn't want to share it because they're afraid that somebody might use it against them, right? It's just that safeguarding of their feelings. And to validate that, and this fella told me, he goes, I can't be safe on the street, but I can thank them in my head. When somebody passes oil, I'll say thank you and pray for them. So we gave them a safe place in their head, in their heart. So I think that was the beginning. I think we planted the seeds, and it's so good to hear all the grants and everything that's coming out of this work. Keep up the good work, Josh.
We're all doing it together, you know, we're just all doing it together, and I'm learning like everyone else, right, on how to provide better services, how to provide more heart within it. And at the end of the day, you know, like, I think it's just coming at it with a curiosity to just knowing I don't know. And that's why I love the way we've developed the project, where we're all leaning on each other, and then we're also asking people, like, what do you need? Because it's not up to me to decide, it's up to you, and understand what you need. And so I think it's really great from the results that were coming in, and what we're able to share moving forward. We have not as much time as I thought we were going to have, but so if anyone has any kind of questions that they want to pose, I know you either raise your hand or put it into the chat. Also, due to the limited time, you can also email us and we can respond to those questions. We do have 2 hands up. I'm not sure if those have been up for a while, so I'm not sure if those are actual questions. Paulette, I see your hand is up. Did you have a question? No? Okay, so let's see that. And Margaret, I see your hand is up. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so it doesn't seem we have too many questions coming in. That's okay. I'll just give a moment for if there's any last words that the 3 of you sort of want to say as we move forward in this area, and when it comes to the potential for not only what this research can do, but our hopes for how others can sort of be in this space and change maybe the way they sort of see their own organizational supports for people experiencing homelessness. So Jess, do you have any last comments as we sort of wrap up?
I don't think I honestly do, but I am seeing some questions in the chat for like, is there access to bereavement training for people facing homelessness and addictions?
Oh.
Yeah, there's a few there.
Oh, there. Okay, I missed those. Okay, yeah. So one of the big things that we're trying to work on right now is to develop that educational module that's going to help people to be able to provide confidence, I believe is a good word, to providing a safe space and understanding grief and bereavement more, and also be able how to hold the safe space for themselves, but also for their clients, but also for themselves, because as everyone has been talking today, just hearing the stories is a lot, and a lot of people who are the community workers are working with their own loss, and we heard that even through the frontline perspectives on their own grief. And so how can we support the workers also as they sort of move forward in this area, because there's a lot of love that they give, and there's a lot of grief that they hold, and that hasn't been able to been expressed yet or honored. And so hopefully that module can really do more in that area, and changing the organizational systems, which is a goal from that, to allow more of an honoring and a better trained management to be able to hold the spaces that need to be held for these workers. Yes, so the study notes, or the 2 summaries that we have so far, will be sent to everyone who's signed up for this. And I think that is the last question we can take, because we're at 1:15, and I know it's been a longer sort of study. And so I just want to thank everyone for being here. This is sort of our team at the 2 different sites. And so, yeah, thank you again, Stephanie, Sherry, Jody, and Jessica, just being here today, and just, let's say, like, being a part of this project, because this project only works because of who we are individually and how we come together. And I said, like, Sherry, you've done a lot of the legwork in really providing that space, but I love it, and I love getting to know everyone. And I think everyone comes with a certain perspective, but with just a beautiful heart for the work and the importance of that work. And so I think that's what matters to sort of how we collected the data and providing that safe space for those individuals. And so before we end, just do one last poll. If Esther, you can put that up. And so as the poll comes up, we just really hope you all enjoyed the sessions, and we're going to ask you to complete a short survey that sort of comes when you close this meeting. And so registration for the next session is titled Disenfranchised Loss, Addressing the Needs of Pet Loss Grief Support. And it's scheduled for September 25th from 12 to 1. And to be notified of any other sessions in the series, you can also subscribe to our newsletter. And our aim is to provide a copy of the presentation recording, and also summary notes within 7 working days. And so the question from the poll, has your knowledge level in today's topic increased? And 40% somewhat, 60% a lot. So that says a lot. As we move forward, we can keep that in our hearts. You know, like even doing this talk has changed a lot in how people sort of understand the topic. And so as we come to a close, I just said once again, mention a thank you to everyone being a part of this, but also being here today and taking the time out of your busy schedules to honor this work and to hear more about it. That's always beautiful. And last but not least, like to sort of mention that registration is open for an upcoming All Together Symposium on October 4th of this year, which the BC Centre for Palliative Care is hosting in Vancouver, BC at the Pinnacle Harbourfront Hotel. And so this will be an exciting day of workshops, networking, and learning with noted community and healthcare experts in compassionate communities and palliative care. So if you want to know more of that information, you can visit the BC Centre website. And once again, thank you again so much for being here. And we hope to sort of see you in future ECHO sessions moving forward.
Hey, Josh.
Yes.
I just usually just because there's death is such a big thing spiritually. Do you mind if I say a quick closing prayer?
Please do. Please do.
My name is Sherry Landry from Deka Goti Dene Band here in the Silks Territory, Mushy Joe Creator. God, and all those in the spirit world, all those that have passed, help us, watch over us, and guide us in what we do in every day and how we meet people where they're at, and how we can better this lives for those that hold that grief that aren't growing when they should be, and letting go of those that are grieving things that should have been gone a long time ago, and help us to help them the best that we can. And let us go with open hearts and open minds and open ears so our mouth can say the right stuff. Masicho. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.